for being here. Thank you for taking time out of your Sunday. I hope you're enjoying the book if you're reading it, if you've already read it, and I know some of you maybe haven't gotten your books yet. So I'm going to just start with two short passages. In the evening, Mortaza and I meet on the couch for the married person's evening ritual, TV. Along with a nightly bowl of microwave popcorn, we've been putting away 2 episodes of The Mindy Project after Z is in bed. We guffaw and cringe in the same places. We are diasporic South Asian children of immigrants communing over the embarrassing life of a diasporic South Asian child of immigrants. While the credits roll, Mortaza leans over, kisses my neck, and says, "Shall we turn it off now or watch another episode?" "Sure, Murthy, we can turn it off," I say, sensing his preference. After all, it is Saturday and 9 p.m. I'd prefer to hit play, to be distracted by someone else's awkward world, but I appreciate my husband's good-natured and consistent initiative-taking. My friends and I talk about our lackluster sex lives and waning libidos, and I feel like I'm the lucky one amongst us. At least we can say we are still doing it, rather than being in couples therapy because we aren't, or breaking up because we aren't, or having extramarital affairs because we aren't. So that's Sharifa, and I'll read a very short passage from Abdulali, who is a character who comes in periodically. And at this point, he's 11 years old, and it's January 1866 in South Bombay. 11-year-old Abdulali huddled under the yellow glow of a street lamp, his index finger pacing his labored reading. "The lion lives in the jungle," he whispered. "His roar is loud." An elderly fruit seller trudged by with an empty wooden cart pulled by a weary bullock. Just in time, Abdulali wrapped his legs around the post to avoid a heavy hoof landing on his toe. A fly, one of the bullock's many-winged passengers, hopped onto his hand and then onto the Hindi primary reader he had borrowed from Sunil, the 9-year-old boy of the family for whom he worked. He told his mother it was a gift. Did she believe the lie?
So hello and welcome everybody. Thank you so much, Farzana, for that introduction. So the first question I have for you, Farzana, is how long did it take you to write this book?
Yeah, and it's hard to answer that because so much of writing is done in fits and spurts for me. Like I started writing this book at the very end of 2015, but then I went on a new agent search, which meant, sending out a submission and then waiting. And then my agent was searching for a publisher, and then there's a lot of waiting. And so in the waiting times, I started writing a YA novel. So I would say that maybe it took about 2.5 years of actual writing. And then it was probably about 2.5 years of waiting.
And how many edits did you go through in that time?
I lost count, but I am somebody who does many edits. I sometimes say like it's over a dozen revisions because I just keep going around. I start again and I'll do another set of revisions. I might have sent it out to a beta reader, gotten some feedback, and then done another round. I really actually like editing a lot, and I like revision.
Thank you. So this is, and I put this in our questions because I'm like, I feel really silly to ask this because, so when I read the book, I was alternating between the print and the audiobook. So for those of you who are connected to Audible or do audiobooks, I have to say that the audiobook, and maybe we can talk about that a little later, the audiobook is fantastic. The actors who who did the reading, it really enriches your understanding of the story. And so I have to say, I give that a huge recommendation. But I didn't get the title. Can you help me?
What does 7 mean?
Yeah. What did I miss?
Okay.
I'm like, did I fall asleep at a really important moment while I'm listening to the
Maybe,
audiobook?
maybe you did. So 7 refers to the age at which this ritual happens
Oh,
to girls, right?
of course.
And then it also refers a little bit. One of the characters is Z, Sharifa and Murtaza's daughter, who plays an important role in the novel, and she's 7 at the time too. So it's a couple of things.
I can't
Can I
believe
just
I
tell you,
missed that.
I had planned actually for this novel to be called Four Wives, to be connected to Abdulali's Four Wives. I thought that would be a fun title, but I think about 6 months to a year ago, a book came out, and I can't remember the author's name now. She did really well with it, and her book was called Five Wives. And I just thought, oh gosh, this is going to be weird. And my publisher said, yeah, don't name it Five Wives or Four Wives because of Five Wives. So sometimes you have a completely different title going through the entire writing process, and then at the end it gets changed, and that was the case with 7.
And the other balance that I think you handled so finely is you have very, with the whole the issue of female genital mutilation and cutting, you have a clear point to this book that you want people to know about, to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And yet again, it didn't feel didactic. It didn't feel in my face. And how do you handle, as a writer, writing about something that clearly is unpleasant and again hidden? I think kind of like the sex, and it's hidden, it's a taboo topic, and yet you inform a reader about it in a way that doesn't feel heavy-handed and actually we want to read.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that your balance there was artful.
Thank you. I tried very hard around that because I'm also an activist in this area, and it's always didactic when in my activism. So how I thought I wanted to do this was through a lot of nuance and a lot of characters who were in different emotional places around the issue. And I very consciously wrote Sharifa as someone who was quite clueless, so that the reader would be able to learn alongside her and be, understanding and shocked and all the things alongside her. And I also wanted to make sure that, the other characters who were even pro Khatna were relatable. Because we have to understand this issue in a kind of 360 way if we're going to ever be able to do anything about it or even have conversations about it. We really have to be nuanced. And when I started my activism, I wasn't at all nuanced. I was just raging all the time, for good reason. Just something you can rage against, right? And I just realized that I wasn't going to be able to have any good conversations with people in my family if I was just, raging. And so, 5 years into the activism, I think I'm able to say, yeah, I understand that you think that it could, make a girl more sexually pure. And I also think you're wrong. Before I would have just screamed at them, the second part. So I think we need nuance if we're going to get anywhere in this issue. Yeah. And I don't know. I think it was just through many, 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 many drafts and lots of feedback. So in terms of the how, it was just continuously picking away at it.
So one of the questions from the chat, Farzana, and this was an interesting question because it actually goes back to another session we ran with another author. It was, as a Canadian writer who has set one book in Canada, why did you choose to have these characters live in the US? Was there some significance to that choice?
Absolutely, yeah. All of the other novels have some Canada, like the first 2 are very Toronto set. The third one, I have a character who, comes from Hamilton, Ontario, and then much of the novel is in Mexico at an all-inclusive resort. And then this one, I had initially started it as being Toronto and India. And then I thought a little bit about, this is my fourth novel. I would really love to increase my audience. We love Canadian audiences as Canadian authors. And the Canadian audience is small because our population is small. And, for most readers, you might not know that we earn $2 a book. And in Canada, a bestseller is 5,000 books. So think about the process of, spending 5 years on a book and maybe selling 5 to 10,000 copies if you're a bestseller, and making $10,000 to $20,000. The U.S. audience is about 8 to 10 times that. So the issue of making a living, making an income is really a serious one for writers, and so we have to get audiences. We have to expand our audiences into the U.S. and other places as well. And the United States is very United States focused. So while they do read books about all kinds of Canadian settings, I wanted to give my book a little bit of a head start by not having it in Canada and India, but in New York and India. And the New York part is small enough. It's a short part of the book that I could use a limited amount of research and a couple of friends to help me with settings and so on. So it was not hard. I think it would have been really hard for me to write a novel that was exclusively in New York City or something, because I would have to spend a lot of time there to really feel like I got the feeling of it. But yeah, this was pretty intentional.
A few years ago, one of my sons was in high school, and they talked about the subject of female circumcision, and it was supposed to be a 2-part class. But after the first part, it sounded like the students were getting kind of traumatized by the whole thing. They ended up stopping the second part. I had mixed feelings about that, because I thought, here's a very important topic and we're talking about it openly and in class, but I wondered, were parents getting upset because the kids were upset, or was it because it was taboo, or what was happening? So I guess my question to you is, as the author of this book and as a psychotherapist, is this something we should be talking about with our kids in school?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Canada doesn't have any kind of national action plan around FGM, and it really needs to. In any country where there is a national action plan, there's a range of services for survivors, and there are prevention measures to ensure that it doesn't happen to girls. And Canada has none of that. It's illegal here, but there's nothing to back up the law. And it's estimated that there's 100,000 survivors of various forms. And there's many different forms of FGM in Canada. And lots of anecdotal evidence to show that there is what's called vacation cutting. So kids taken out of the country for it, as well as it happening here within communities. And I think if we can normalize the conversation around it, we can just be a little bit more aware of it, the way that we're getting more aware of things like sexual harassment and sexual assault and child abuse. Like we're just a little bit more aware, so we know how to act. And I think in places like the UK and Tanzania, teachers play this huge role in monitoring what's going on around them, because you're seeing the same kids, and you might hear that they're planning to go, on a trip to a country, or that maybe they're sitting in class and they're really uncomfortable and they want to talk to you about something. So teachers have this big role to play, and that's often part of the action plan, is to make sure that educators understand things. And part of normalizing the conversation is to understand that it's not this weird issue that weird people do way over there. We're really understanding, as more and more people talk about it, that it really is in our own backyards, that you probably have a neighbor who's a survivor or a coworker. And recently there have been white Christian survivors in the US who are coming forward to say that it happened to them too. So if, white Christians in the US are speaking about this, it's probably happening around with white Christians in Canada too, right? So I think that, again, as we continue to be able to make this an accessible dialogue, we will just learn how prevalent this is. And I really try to encourage people to think about it as part of a continuum of gender-based violence that happens globally. So it's not really that different from sexual assault or child abuse or even rape culture or sexual harassment culture. Like it's all part of the same continuum. We've just been super queasy to talk about this one because, and you know, I can get queasy about it too because it has to do with our genitals.
I had a really interesting discussion just yesterday with a group of disabled authors talking about these words, which you used again today, of didactic versus nuanced. And one of the sort of positions that was put forward there in terms of looking at writing through a disability justice lens is the idea that didactic is a word that is actually clear about ableism, and nuanced is often a word thrown at disabled writers when they want us to pare something back, to soft pedal it, to tone it down, to make it more palatable to abled readers. So my question for Farzana is, have you changed at all your attitude about or your beliefs about the relationship between activism and writing from this book?
Haven't changed my beliefs. I really think that we can be both authors and activists at the same time. You know, this is a book that is nuanced, and I'm hopeful that it's a contribution to the End FGM movement. Mm-hmm. I know in my own community, because this is such a taboo subject, we do have to often come in these sneaky ways, like the activism, the activist material has to get in some sneaky ways for people to be open to a conversation, even within my own community, even amongst survivors. So there's some ways that I think I would bring in some of the didactic moments, and that was through Fatima's character, because she's the activist in the book, right? So she's the one who says like a hardline things, and Sharifa sometimes shrinks from it, right? So that was one way to get the material in there. Like all of the material about the politics of Khatna really comes through Fatima. So that's one way of, not losing the activism while also keeping it within story that's gonna keep people reading. There is this line, right? You want people to keep reading. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there are so many forms of activism that are at our disposal, and I think, you know, there's not necessarily anything wrong with being more didactic in the work. Some people are going to enjoy that more. Mm-hmm. So let's use all of our forms. Just like in the book, you know, there are people who sign petitions, and some people who are out on the street yelling, and then there are other people who are very quietly, subversively doing things. I think it's all valid, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, there's been such a setup in CanLit that didactic is always bad and nuanced is always good, and I'm not sure that binary is useful.
Yes, and then also like who gets accused of being didactic, right? It's always the marginalized folks. Yeah, because we're bringing new issues, right? We're speaking up. We're like, we're rattling things.